Welcome back to another episode of the Gap Downbacker podcast. Today we have Coach Rick Worsell with us. He is the Director of Research and Analytics at the University of Akron. Coach, how you doing?
Good, great. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Coach, and I appreciate coming on. And we chit-chatted a little bit before, and I asked you a couple things, mainly to verify how the pronunciation of where you've been before, but kind of for people who haven't had a chance to listen to you, or how did you end up at the University of Akron?
All right. Well, this is gonna be the next 3 hours of your podcast. Gonna be the longest episode ever. So, grew up, born and raised in England. So not too many people kind of starting off there. Went through college, played college football in the UK. There's a growing league out there. Got into coaching, and decided after graduation, I was working for an investment company that I decided I wanted to, try and, get into coaching more. And if I needed to do that, I needed to move to the US. So I came home one day from work and I was talking to my parents, and they were like, well, just start applying, start trying to do it. And as everyone out there knows, to get into college football is incredibly competitive. And so I started sending my stuff everywhere. I made a resume and cover letter and started sending it to every school in the country, and eventually landed a job offer that I thought was going to be really good for me. And then they backed out of the offer, and so I was kind of bummed out. I was like sat at home like, I don't think this thing's going to happen, and I was really kind of despondent at that point. And then the job landed on the Scoop, and Football Scoop, I'm sure everyone hopefully has been on it at some point. So I sent my stuff in, via fax back then to kind of date when it was. And I was like, mentally, I'm thinking this is the last one I'm applying for. And I went to the movies, and I got back and had an email from the head coach saying, hey, call me. And so I called him. We're on the phone 8 minutes, and he's like, hey, you want the job? And I'm like, heck yeah. So I go in, I quit my job the next day and spend the rest of my money on a plane ticket, pack literally one bag, and move from just south of London to rural Wisconsin, where I was a Division III GA, living in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Living on campus. My first night I arrived, I was living in a dorm, and they hadn't put any furniture in my dorm room. So I get there and there's nothing. There's no bed, no desk. I'm like, what did I just do? So I slept on the floor, got up next morning, went in the office and went around becoming a ball coach. So did my GA stuff there for 2 years. We were really fortunate to turn that program around, and they'd gone 4-6. We went 8-2, and then we won the league the next year. That led to me getting a job at Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, and did 3 years there. Was the pass game coordinator, coached receivers, then switched over to quarterbacks my last season. We did okay. I certainly learned an awful lot being in the CCIW. It's a very competitive conference, and just you see a lot of some of those coaches now are coaching in the MAC, so it's kind of full circle. It's kind of interesting. And then bounced across to Illinois College for my first chance to be a play caller. So was a play caller there for 3 years. We were really exceptional on offense, broke a lot of records, produced a lot of good players, and won a lot of ball games. And then one of my really closest friends got a head coaching job in Southern California and said, hey, you want to move to Southern California and be an offensive coordinator? I'm like, well, heck yeah, let's go and do this. So yeah. I moved to the University of Laverne and spent 8 years there as the offensive coordinator. We took over a team that had won. They'd lost like 19 or 20 games in a row at one point. They'd won 4 games, I think, the previous 4 years around those like 20 losses in a row. And our first recruiting class, by the time they were seniors, we went undefeated and won the conference championship. So it was like a huge turnaround from being a laughingstock to being pretty good. And it was during those years that I started using more and more numbers in terms of helping game plan. Like, it started off with what are the best formations that I should use against this opponent. And it just kind of, it grew and grew, and I got more and more curious about, how can math and stats help me make decisions in game planning, because you often don't have a lot of time. Like in the off season, yeah, you can sit there for 2 or 3 weeks and, you don't have practice and come up with some great ideas. But in season, you got Sunday and you got Monday and you're practicing and you need to like have a whole plan together. So started getting into more numbers and comparing our numbers to what our opponent was struggling with, and that started shaping the direction of our game plans more and more. And I think everyone who played for us at that point, they kind of realized that like our players would get used to hearing the stats and the relative information, about all these different things. So, that kind of progressed through, and until 2019, I got a phone call to join Tom Arth's staff. Like he'd come over from Chattanooga, and so I got a phone call in December, January to come here. And there's, hey, there's no job description. We're gonna just figure things out. And so I've kind of created this role here, and it's pretty unique. I've had a lot of people reach out to me this off season and from other colleges trying to figure out A, what exactly it is I do, and B, how they can do it. And so it's been really rewarding being involved in all three phases of the game, advising the coaches on everything you could possibly think of. So it's been good.
Well, you kind of just hit a little bit on my next question is what do you actually look at? Like, I know you might not be able to like break it down in every little detail, but like I mean, and you can get as depth with it as you want. What does a director of research and analytics do? Because like from the like fans probably have a very micromanageable idea of what that is. Us coaches have a rough idea what that is. But I think that, one, it probably varies by program, but two, I'm just interested, every program views data and analytics a little differently. So how do you approach that?
Good question. So that's the $1 million question right there. It's pretty interesting. So what I try and do is to apply, the years of experience I have into looking at in season our opponents and getting a very clear view of what they're about and how they win and lose football games.
Yeah.
And then in the off season, I mean, it's everything. Anything that you could look at can be studied. And so it's, I may look at, okay, I'll try and give you an example here. Right, let's talk about like low red zone third down plays.
Yeah.
Well, on the course of your season, you may run 2 or 3 of them, and so over the last few years, you may have 10 of them you run. But then, okay, so I might go into the NFL and pull every one from the last 2 years and give me a couple of hundred, and then start breaking them down and seeing which are the most successful concepts, and flip side, what a defense is trying to do down there. So whilst there's one very specific field position situation and down and distance, you try and be the most educated you can on that scenario, because it may not happen very often. So, we try and apply that to what we do. It's putting thought into when you're scripting in camp, what the down and distance situations are that you're using every day, rather than just, hey, it's going to be 1st and 10. We're just running plays. Like, everything that we do with Coach Arth is situationally based. So it's, what percentage do you need? Should these plays be 1st and 10? Where should they be? So it kind of applies to a lot of different areas. It impacts our scripting. It impacts our game planning. It impacts as we put playbooks together in the off season. And it impacts understanding our opponents. So in my mind, and this may sound a little hippie-ish, I guess, but football coaches are a lot like musicians. Everyone has their influences. So when I GA'd, I worked for Jim Zabrowski, who's at the University of Buffalo now in the MAC. And we ran power. better than anybody else ran power. So the rest of my career, I always ran power because it's something drilled into me at a young age.
Yeah.
And so that was an influence on me. Well, every coach is kind of the same way. You have people you've been around that you picked up things and you do it that way forever. And so you're trying to discover these influences for everybody and describe them as best you can.
Now, you mentioned practice there, and I'm kind of curious how much, not only just here at Akron, but also when you were at Laverne, how much did this data and this approach cause you to overhaul practice both in the spring and the summer? And what were kind of the biggest changes you've kind of made during that course?
When we're at Laverne, we made a decision, I want to say halfway in, we'd always gone with 5-minute periods.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked around and decided to go to 3-minute periods. The length of practice doesn't change, but now what we did is sometimes, hey, we're going to go kick PAT field goals for 3 minutes instead of 5.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there was drills we felt where it didn't need to be 5 minutes long. It would be, we'd always have like the drill for Indy in there and then know that we were going to do a second drill for the rest of the period. So we were like, let's just adjust it to 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And that actually kept us going a lot quicker at practice. It was like, hey, we need to get, X number of plays scripted. So then I was always trying to track how many plays we could run in a 3-minute period. And so that then mathematically going back and tracking that and then coming back in the next day and you knew how many plays you had to script for those periods. So I think it always factored in, and we're always trying to change, maybe not the structure of practice as much, but how we set up practice, how much we scripted. Because, if you've got 12 plays, you're going to run in 6 minutes, you could snap the ball every 30 seconds. How many of those are going to be in the middle of the field? How many are on each hash? How many different concepts are you going to run? So the whole thing turns into this framework pretty quickly, and you're just plugging in the plays and formations towards the end. That's like the last part you do, really.
Yeah. Now, at the same time, is how much, obviously, you're breaking down, how do I word this? You're breaking down efficiency and looking at your data. How much did you look at, because you mentioned shorten your periods there, how much did you also look at, okay, how can I break down my practices and play calling in more depth, and when's a more efficient time to maybe run this or do that? Because you mentioned shortening your PATs because you don't need 5 minutes there and 3 minutes there. Like, is there anything else you adjusted? Is there anything you found that, okay, this is better in a short period of time, this is better, I need more time for this? Is there a better time to practice? Is there a better time to stretch? Like, I'm just curious at this point.
Yeah, the sports science piece is kind of fascinating. I'm not really an expert in that, but I know like people will get into like how long you should stretch for and all that sort of stuff. For me, what I really focused on was, if I think I can run 60 snaps today, how do I want to divide those up? And so I discovered before I'd always gone like 1 day of red zone. And so what essentially we ended up doing was we would do red zone every single day. And we improved so much in the red zone because of doing that. And then a lot of coaches talk about, hey, they don't do red zone until later on in the week. But we would touch it every day. And then we would re-rack the same script the first day to the second day. And I'm sure every coach does it. If you felt like it was going to take you too long to correct something the first day, going into the second day, then we scratched it.
Yeah.
And then, one of the things we did is if we didn't rep a play during practice, it didn't make it onto the play card. Now, some years we, towards the end we were there, on Wednesdays and Thursdays, we started just playing game situations in practice.
Yeah.
So we would have 7 of those things. So it was like, we're going to start off, it's 1st and 20 after a holding call. We're going to play this thing out. And the defensive, the guy running the scout team has an idea of the defensive structure, and we're not using cards. And he's just freewheeling it, like just trying to mess with us. He's on a headset, he can hear what we're calling, and he's trying to put us in a bind. And we're playing a game. And I remember this in practice. We were first and 20. We took a sack on the first play against Scouts, so I'm not feeling too good about life. Second and 26, and we converted it into a first down and went and scored. Well, the next game, we ended up in a 2nd and 26 situation, and we converted that and went and scored. So, you don't always want to think of those outlying situations, but they kind of tend to happen, and you need to be prepared for them. So we'd go through about 7 situations with our 1s and our 2s, and we kept score of, hey, our 1s scored on this drive. Okay, 2s, you got to score. And that kind of changed the dynamic of how we did it. And essentially what I operated with then was I'd try and make the play card earlier in the week and just check mark off the plays we ran in practice and kind of go through that. And the other thing you kind of found out was truly what plays you like to call and what you didn't. Because everyone reps something during the week. They're like, this play is going to be great in the game. You spend all week on it. And you go in the game, you're just like, I'm really not sure about this play we spent all week on. I'm not going to call it.
Yeah, you call it 1 or 2 times.
Every week. So then I kind of knew, like, hey, I don't trust this. Like, I'm not doing it. So that was kind of like an involvement for us. And I think our players enjoyed that a little bit more because they just were playing situations out. They were playing football again. And our defensive guys that were playing on the scout team at that point, they weren't on cards. They had the ability to be in favorable situations. Hey, it's 1st and 20, guys. Let's get off the field. Like, so we did some cool stuff. And that was driven through research, seeing what trends were out there, understanding how many snaps we would get. And we would really get to that when we felt we had read the core game plan earlier in the week. And then it was like, okay, let's do this. And one of the 7 would be the what if period. So it was like, hey, we saw this defense once from our opponent. So let's do a whole series of just, hey, there are 3 down, but we're going to go in a bear front, or we're going to go 4 down and play cover 3, something we've never seen from them. Yeah. And just give it to our guys and see if they can adapt on the field.
Well, you just gave me about 17 more questions, Coach. I'll try to minimize some of these. But the first one I want to ask, because as you've done this data, in both as an OC and at Akron, how much does that cause an overhaul to your play call sheet, like in its design or view? You mentioned obviously it changes. Okay, I'm checking this throughout the week. Okay, what am I actually running? What am I not? Okay, what have we repped heavily? But how did it change the overall look and presentation, or did it at all?
I think the template was the same for my play card. It just, certain boxes became more impactful for me.
Okay.
Like our opening script, I always had it in my mind that if we scored in our opening script, I was going to re-rack it and run the opening script again.
Yeah.
And if we scored again, I'm going to do the same thing again. But then I'm kind of stubborn. So I'll give you an example. Our offensive staff used to laugh about it. If we'd find a formation and a play that we felt like you couldn't line up and defend, and we ran it once, let's say it's inside zone out of 3-by-1, and we get 8 yards, then I'm going to come back and try it again on 2nd and 2 and see if you adjust. And if there's no obvious adjustment, and we get 6 more yards, then I'm going to call it again the next play. And we had multiple games in a row where we ran the same play from the same formation in the second half of ball games, where we were just, maybe an adjustment would come, but we had the answers kind of built into the play to the point that, we didn't have to do a whole bunch else to win it. So we did that. I remember running plays 20 plus times in a row successfully to win games. Yeah. So I think finding those top formations, the opening scripts became really important. And then I always had a hard time because the opening script would change. Like some weeks I felt really good about 7 plays. Some weeks I felt really good about certain formations or personnel. And so you're trying to get them in the opening script. But then if you really like inside zone out of 2 tight ends, then it's probably going to go on your 3rd and short play call. So then you're trying to organize your opening script in such a way that you don't run the same thing back to back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and kind of building off of that, I mean, you mentioned formations there. Have you found that there are, I mean, any formations that are specifically more advantageous at the college level than they would be, just that are more advantageous to run based off your data?
Week to week, opponent to opponent, each team, I wouldn't say struggle, that's probably the wrong word, but there's definitely like, hey, some weeks you want to be in a 2x2, regardless of the breakdown of that formation, whether it's a tight end and a receiver each way, or whether it's flexed out receivers each way. So you try and understand that about your opponent is, if running the ball is 65% efficient out of 3x1 and 50% out of 2x2, well, why is there a huge spike in 3x1? So you start looking at those numbers and seeing, okay, people getting 3x1, they run the ball weak, there's no safety help, there's a chance for a big play. And so it's different for every team, but I think understanding that is a big part of the game planning process is like, what formations and personnel do I need to be in? What are that they struggle with the most? And your own people, like if you look at a team and they can't handle 14 personnel, but you're a spread team, then that doesn't help you a whole bunch. But if you see that they can't handle being in empty, then you probably have a pretty dose of empty, that week.
Okay.
So it was always like when you would look at our film at the end of the season, I remember you'd look at our 3rd and short cut up. I remember looking at it thinking, we're really simple on offense. And then we pull it up and it was like, 20 clips. And it was like 20 unique formations with 20 different ways of running different plays.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until looking at the sum of everything, how kind of complicated it did look for our opponents, even though for us it felt we're always doing kind of the same things. We're just doing it in the formations and personnel that we feel give us the best odds.
Okay. Now, I mean, have you seen? I'm gonna kind of combine. Actually, no, I won't combine. Have you seen any trends? Like you've mentioned formations. You mentioned down and distance. On this, is there any like specific data you look at? Like, or you have found that is more important for you to analyze than others? I mean, you've mentioned a little bit formations here, a little bit down and distance, and plays that ran during that. But is there anything specific like, okay, we need to be good here, or I need to look here because these tend to help lead to the more success for us?
There's like 2 answers to this question. The first part is each opponent is unique and you need to look at different data points for your opponent.
Okay.
So there's going to be a core of the same, but then you need to add different columns for each team to kind of get a real feel for what they're about. For us, I mean, there's things that we talk about in Akron is like the value of a yard, calculating your yard per play differential is a huge telling point. So what you do is, it's a pretty simple formula. You take, say you ran 100 offensive plays and you had 500 yards of offense, you had 5 yards per play.
Mm-hmm.
If your opponent had 100, plays of offense and ran at 400 yards, they had, 4 yards per play. So you were plus 1 yard per play. Well, when you're at that differential, you win, I forget what the percentage is, but you win a high percentage of your games. And so when you start looking at that, sometimes I've been in games where you're running like over 100 plays, but you don't feel like you have a ton of yards or a ton of points because you're not getting enough yards per play, and that's kind of hurting the scoreboard. So we talk about those things. The thing I'm really into right now is the first play to open drives.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at, I looked at an NFL team recently, just as an example, and if their first play of a drive was 5 yards or more, they scored on like 82% of drives.
Dang.
If it was 4 yards or less, they scored on 43% of drives.
That's a big difference.
Just the first play of a drive. So there's things like that, we're big into things like that right now. But in season, you're trying to figure out what is it that drives this team, what gives them oxygen. That's always a good phrase. And just trying to get a really good handle on what they're about. So like 1 week you may have a nose shade column that you're putting in. Is this guy shading to the field, to the boundary, to the formation? So you can have a good idea of how they're lining up, because when you're just watching it, it feels a little random. And then you suddenly realize it's always to the boundary. If it goes to the field, they're bringing a blitz. And but the next week you're playing a 4-down team, and that isn't relevant at all. So you're looking at something totally different. And that's where kind of your initial watch through of the film, like watching 2 or 3 games, has to point you in that direction of, okay, what little mini studies do we need to do in the next 24 hours to help us prepare for game planning these guys without taking us all day, without needing an elaborate presentation, just like a yes, no answer. Like, how do we calculate?
Okay. Now you mentioned, earlier, you mentioned briefly both kind of what your in-season and out-of-season looks like, but what does your day-to-day in-season look like as a director of research and analytics?
It looks just like a normal coach. Like, you get practice, you're trying to prepare, I'm working basically a week ahead of our coaching staff. So, like, if week 2 we're playing Team B, like before we play Team A, I'm breaking them down, looking at them the whole week. If they haven't faked a punt that year, I'm looking at the previous year. If they didn't fake one then, I'm looking at the year before that. I'm trying to get an overall picture of this coach and spending a good week on them so that when Sunday comes around, I can not only give them scouting reports, but I can sit down and talk to a high level about all 3 phases of the team and what their team is built like. So that Sunday after we play is really one of the few days I'm truly on the same team as the rest of our coaches. And then during the week, I'll produce like a series of not PowerPoints, but like video presentations like you would in Huddle with slides and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's all situation like, what are they doing 2-minute, 3rd down, red zone, and try and, give some more specific info to our coaches. But, you're really working a week ahead. So you just have time to kind of really sit and look at a team and try and get a feel for them. You can watch a TV copy here and there, and you have like a big checklist of questions you're trying to go through and get to know them.
Now, you mentioned earlier about, each team's a little different in how you look at them and scout them based off a variety of measures. How much is that factored in based off who either the coordinator or the head coach is, and if they switch schools? Do you go, okay, this coordinator was at this school last year and now they're at this school, or 2 years ago, and now they're at this school and we play them? Do you go back to some of that data and be like, okay, I need to look at these points, or does those points just completely different because that's a completely different team?
No, you got to look. Like, if something happens, even if it's like a little small amount, I want to go find it. So, we see that a little bit. Season openers are always really tough for everybody, because if it's the same coaching staff, you feel a little more comfortable. You can watch the previous year and get an idea on it. But if it's a whole new coaching staff, then you need to look at every place that staff is coming from, and get a feel for them. And then, early in the game, kind of make some judgments as to, what are they doing? If you can, find out anything ahead of that, then it's hugely beneficial. So, you're looking back at those other teams. It's, we do that all the time with the brand, like, non-conference team. You never played them before. they got a new coaching staff. Where did they come from? All right, let's look and see what they did. And usually you'll find, just like we said with musicians earlier, there's going to be a lot of carry.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, and I got two more questions before we go, Coach. And both kind of relate to how to translate this to the high school level. I mean, obviously, we don't have budgets or the time to have a director of research and analytics, as much as useful as that would be for us. Just like all of us don't have actual directors of strength training either. But first, before I get to the overall broad question, if you were a high school offensive coordinator, and obviously you don't necessarily have the time because you're also teaching classes, what are like the main like 3 to 5 data points would you maybe tell high school offensive coordinators to kind of focus on?
So I think you can tell a lot about another team just by having like down and distance, the field position, the game, like those 4 things, which about every team's going to have in there, and then grading every play, whether it's efficient or inefficient. So if a play on first down gets 4 or more yards, I say that's efficient. If it's second down, you need to halve the distance to gaining a first down. And on third down, you need to get a first down. So if you can put those things in, then without any formations, without coverages, without blitzes, you can see, hey, this team on 3rd and 1 gives up 100, is 100% efficient. Okay, this team we're playing really bad on 3rd and short. Or hey, like 3rd and short, they've given up 0% efficient. Like it starts telling you situationally about your opponent before you even get into game plan, which based on the information you have about their opponents, who they've played, you get a pretty good idea of how good they are. Then when you start adding in just formation and play family, like, it's buck sweep or it's triple option or it's play action, you group those together and you calculate those efficiencies. You can be like, hey, triple option is 65% efficient. All right, that's good. Speed option is 35% efficient. That's bad. So with just those kind of 6 things, you're starting to now understand what the best formations, the best plays are. You're understanding your opponent's deficiencies in every down and distance situation. You know how good they are in the red zone. You're building a pretty clear picture of them. And then the one thing you have to understand is, like, if you're playing, I don't know, let's say you're playing Team A and they've played Alabama, Notre Dame, and Clemson in the first 3 games. That's 3 highly, powerful teams. You need to understand that as it factors into the stats. You don't have to weight them. You just got to understand, hey, the reason these numbers are skewed is because they played unbelievable competition. I think for any high school coach, whoever you're playing, you should know who your opponents are playing. Like, is this a good team? Is this a bad team? Are they on an up year? And then with those 6 data points, I think you're off and running with what you want to do.
Okay. And then my last question is more of a broad, because I wanted to hit on more of the offensive stuff first. How do you think high schools could better implement, or even small colleges, in all honesty, too, would fit in this probably category, because it's kind of the same ballpark with limited staff. How can high school and small colleges better implement data and analytics into their programs? How do you think we could be more efficient based with the resources we have with Huddle, Google Forms, Google Drive? Some have, obviously a lot of us try to film practice, but how can we be more efficient with our data and analytics to be more successful and to put our kids in a better position?
I love Huddle. that's what I had at Illinois College and Laverne. So that's where I started messing with it. The big thing is having like a baseline set of data points. And then the more games you can have with that data in, the better it comes. So I know they changed their storage settings recently, but it used to be I wanted to try and keep all the conference games in the Huddle. So then if I had all the certain data points in there, I could make a big cut-up of the entire conference and start looking conference-wide at different things. But it's having that consistency that we're going to have these data points in the same verbiage for every game. And And we hired a group of students here this semester, and several of them haven't played football before, and we've been teaching them how to do some of this stuff, and they're doing it to a high level. So I kind of think like every high school has to have some kids that want to help the football program, but are maybe not able to play, but you can teach them, hey, is this man or zone coverage? Is this middle of the field open? Is this middle of the field closed? Is there a blitz? Yes or no? Like, you can teach them those basic things, and they can go in and do that for you. And before you know it, with a group of guys and girls that aren't very experienced, you can start getting some really powerful data. So I think it's using that stuff, and then the power of huddle is just people remotely. Like, you can have people anywhere doing it. So somebody who wants to help you that can't make it at practice, they can go on there and type stuff in. So I think there's a huge ability with huddle to be able to do that. It's just kind of taking some time and training those people, showing them what to do, and then having a consistent data set. And then even if you have to download the film, there's ways around it in huddle where you can kind of work around it. Is trying to keep as much of it up there as possible, so you can kind of go back and revisit your different teams of the league, and go back and look and do research projects in the off season, and get an idea of what your league is about. Why do certain teams win? Obviously, there's better players, but I always assumed as a coach, like, it's when you did science in high school, and you're like, okay, everything's going to be the same, but you're going to change this one variable. Well, I'm going to assume I have the same talent of players. So how can we win more games with them? And so it's like, okay, well, what if I change my run to pass play calling in short yardage? All right, let's have a look in our league and see who the best short yardage teams are and what percentage are they, and try and factor out talent and get an idea of what it is your other people in your league are doing that you can take advantage of, that you can also be influenced.
Now, you caused me to ask one more question there is, how would you recommend coaches use, especially high school coaches, because that's kind of my main focus of this, obviously, because that's where I coach, to break down stuff in the off season? I mean, because you mentioned a little bit right there is you mentioned obviously look at your stuff, but how much should we look at, obviously, not just us versus that opponent, but go back through our scout film, relook at data for the how they play their people? How in depth or what should we maybe focus on in the off season to help better prepare ourselves?
I mean, obviously watching your own film is somewhat useful, but I think when you can look at across your conference certain situations, like identify areas you didn't think you were very good, and then make cut-ups across your conference of those situations, that's pretty useful. And most high schools, like, you can exchange some data when you exchange the games. You probably have that in there, so you can be like, hey, let's look at all the 3rd and 1 to 2 yard plays in our conference and see, what are people trying to do? Who's good at it? Is there certain plays that everybody runs that are good that we don't have? Is there things that could fit? And just kind of look through and group things together that way. And that's where I'm pretty fortunate here is I can do that with the MAC, like go in and, hey, let's see a MAC interception of fumble cut up, and where do those turnovers occur? How do they occur? And how do touchdowns occur? Which sounds kind of dumb, but is there a trend in there? Like, if you want to score more. So trying to be an expert in your conference first is paramount. Like, every league is different to win. It's different to win the SEC than it is to win the Akron.
Yeah.
So understanding those different aspects, and then taking a very clear picture of, who's in your league and what they do, and then overall what your league does in different situations. And there's 100 questions you can answer and sit there and go through. But I think that's certainly something I would be doing in the off season, is doing.
Well, that was another episode of the Gap Down Backer podcast. Coaches, Obviously, check out our sponsors affiliates below. If you want to go back and re-listen to any part of this, remember the tags are in the bio. Just click on that; it'll take you back. Same thing if you're just listening to the audio version. The tag should be in the bio, the audio version of the podcast. All that should be in there. Coach's Twitter will be in there. Give him a follow. Coach does some good stuff. They're building something good over there at the University of Akron. And I think that's really it. Again, also as normal, like, subscribe, share, mainly so they can hear Coach and learn from Coach, and maybe possibly reach out, have a chance to reach out to him, help spread knowledge to other coaches in the game. Thank you again, and that was another episode of the Gap Down Backer podcast.